welcome in to Behind the Line. I am Parker Terrell here with
Alex Dusky.
on the beautiful campus of Oklahoma State University here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, talking about all things OSU sports and all kinds of different sports. Alex, how are you?
I'm good. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been here. Last week with the ice storm being out.
2 weeks. It's
you
been
were
2
gone,
weeks
yeah.
since I was here. I was out 2 weeks ago, and then, of course, last week we didn't have the show because of ice.
Right.
So it is good to be back, and we have a lot to talk about.
For sure. Lots have happened in the last 2 weeks with OSU and just sports across the nation.
Absolutely. Let's get right into what happened last Saturday in Boone-Pickens Stadium. Oklahoma State suffered a deflating loss against the Texas Longhorns, 41-34 in overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, what were your thoughts on that game, and what does this mean for OSU?
So statistically, OSU could have and should have won that game. Just looking at overall, OSU had 530 total yards and Texas had 287. So that's just like an insane difference there. But those turnovers, we had 3 fumbles and 1 interception.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched all the post-game interviews, and honestly, being a fan in the stands, it was like, ooh, we lost. But then when I watched the post-game with Gundy and Casey Dunn and the players, it was just heartbreaking to see how much these players really had wanted that win and how upset they were. And they all took it personally, especially Spencer Sanders. I thought he was really mature about it after the game. He was like, I am to blame for this. If you want to bash anyone, you can bash me. Don't bash the team. Which, it is hard because, yes, he was at fault for the interception, but those 2 fumbles, he can't really.
Well, football is a team sport.
Right.
And you can never blame one specific person. Did those turnovers hurt? Yes. But I would say that really the most back-breaking play of that game was the roughing the punter.
Yeah.
At that point in the game, we were ahead. We had stopped them, I believe, after a turnover. Was that after the LD Brown turnover? I think that was later in the game.
Yeah.
But and to get that, running into the kicker would have just been a 5-yard penalty. I bet they would have declined it because then it would have been 4th and 17. But getting a personal foul to get an automatic first down that led them to score, that is just back-breaking and plays that you can't make if you're going to win a Big 12 championship. If you're going to be first in the Big 12, if you're going to make it to the college football playoff, that cannot happen.
Another thing that can't happen is that the kickoff return that our defense allowed.
Yeah.
They returned it the full 100
very
yards
rare
in the
kickoff
third.
return.
Yeah.
In college football nowadays, you don't see very many of those punt or kick return touchdowns. And so, yeah, that was deflating. But even then, we had a chance to win if you just cover the punt normally. We had a chance.
The other questionable call was the overtime pass interference last play. With T. Harper.
Those kind of calls, they go both ways. It's deflating when it happens to your team, but it could have easily happened to Texas. He tripped over his own feet. The receiver didn't see, or the referee didn't see it. So, but going forward, they still have a chance to make the Big 12 title game. Of course, they are still tied for first in the Big 12 with the team they are playing this week in Kansas State, who has fallen out of the rankings after a big loss to West Virginia. And we'll get to that when we talk with Sadeep later on in the show. We'll preview that game. But, Alex, just what are your thoughts just going forward on this team? Do you think that they can bounce back? What do you think?
I think this week, Gundy he was really calm this week. We talked to him on Monday, and he said, that Texas basically had a perfect storm of Oklahoma State mistakes, and that's what allowed them to win. And that it wasn't necessarily so much as Texas winning the game for the Longhorns, but the Cowboys losing it for themselves. So that's something really important to note.
I think that's what's so deflating about that loss.
Right.
If you just look at the raw numbers, just count out turnovers, you would think OSU won 35-7 in this game.
All the players have been saying, we were sad Saturday, but then that couldn't let us get to us because, K-State lost as well, and we know that they're not hanging their heads. And
they're on the road this week.
Right.
And I'll tell you this, if there's any team in college football that can take advantage of mistakes, it's Kansas State and Chris Kleiman. They are so well coached, and that's how they beat OU was earlier in the year, was capitalizing on those mistakes. So if Spencer Sanders and the entire Cowboy team is turnover prone again, then we might find ourselves talking about another Cowboy loss. This time it would be even more devastating because it would probably take us out of that race to the Big 12 championship. Okay, when we come back, we're going to be continuing talking about college football. We're going to recap the Big 12, talk about Pac-12 returning this week, and then give a Big 10 overview. Be sure to stick with us here on Behind the Line.
Hi, I'm Will Joyce, the Mayor of Stillwater. As Mayor, it's my responsibility to help develop plans for a variety of resident needs, including roads, emergency services, and utilities. Some of those services are paid for with federal money that the government distributes to states and communities based on Census Bureau data. This is your tax money coming back to our community, but if you or your household aren't counted, we lose nearly $1,200 per person to places like Texas, Kansas, and Arkansas. So help bring that money back to local communities by filling out the 2020 census. This year, it's easy to do. You'll receive a postcard in March 2020 with a unique code for your address. Using that code, simply go online, call, or request a paper copy of the census and fill it out. I want to make sure that you and your whole household are counted in the 2020 census. It's important not just to Stillwater, but to all of Payne County.
Behind the Line, Parker Taylor here with Alex Dusky, continuing our discussion about college football. We're going to get into the Big 12, and we're going to talk about kind of what happened last week and what's coming up this week. I think the big story, other than, of course, Oklahoma State losing to Texas, was Oklahoma's dominance over Texas Tech.
Yeah, that 62-28. That they just, and it was at Texas Tech, so an away game for the Sooners for sure. What stood out to you for that one?
I mean, it's obvious the big storyline coming out of that game is the return of the two players that had been suspended, Ramondre Stevenson at running back and Ronnie Perkins at defensive end. Those are two guys that got suspended, of course, last season before the Peach Bowl against LSU in the college football playoff and have been out this entire season. It really showed Oklahoma's offense is predicated on a strong run game, and while they haven't been awful this season with guys like TJ Pledger, with guys like Seth McGowan, bringing in Ramondre Stevenson, who is a legitimate going to play in the NFL running back, really just paid dividends. He's a guy that you can give to in those short yardage situations and is pretty much an automatic touchdown every time, and you saw that early. I believe he had like 4 carries and 3 touchdowns because they would just give it to him right there inside the 10-yard line, and he was able to score.
So
OU is going to be they're back on track. It's safe to say they had those 2 losses early to Kansas State when Kansas State had their quarterback, and to Iowa State in a tough game. But Oklahoma, they're really getting rolling. Spencer Sanders hasn't turned the ball over in the last 2 games. I get that one of those was against Kansas, but if OU with their running attack, with Ronnie Perkins, who is their best defensive player, if those guys get going, then Oklahoma might be the team that ends up, taking home the Big 12 crown again.
I know the players, and like what we've been saying is that no one can get too far ahead of themselves. They can't think about the Big 12 championship or even playoffs. They need to just focus week by week. But for sure, that Bedlam games have to be in the back of everyone's mind now.
That's going to determine it, honestly.
Exactly.
If OU wins out, if Texas wins out, they're going to be in the Big 12 championship against each other. Obviously, if Oklahoma State wins out, they should be in the Big 12 championship. That includes beating OU. I don't see, also another thing, I don't see a 2-loss team getting into the playoff this year, but if there is a 2-loss team that might get in, there'd have to be chaos at the top, but it would be OU.
Right.
Because they didn't have those guys to start the year, the college football playoff looks at that kind of stuff. Who did you have? Who didn't you have? And if they truly are, just dominating teams later in the season when it really matters, the College Football Playoff Committee will take notice. And of course, as you said, Bedlam is going to be one whale of a game. It's down in Norman. Oklahoma State is going to have their hands full for sure.
Definitely a lot
Big
of things
news,
to work out.
big news this week is the return of the Pac-12. So, of course, the Big Ten started 2 weeks ago, and now it's the Pac-12's turn. And there are some pretty big games to start off. The first one that I notice is I heard it described as Pac-12 before breakfast, kind of a play on words to the Pac-12 after dark. But Arizona State takes on USC on the road, and USC is giving 10.5 points in this game. Arizona State returns a really good quarterback in Jaden Daniels, who was a true freshman last season. He's coming back. I think that line is really big. I get that USC is ranked and Arizona State is not, but that is a game to look for early. And then, of course, you've got a big-time rivalry game between Stanford and Oregon later at night. Alex, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the Pac-12 returning? And do you think that the Pac-12 is going to have a say in the college football playoff?
I think it's tough for sure because, these teams have been ranked the whole time throughout this season without ever actually playing a game. And so with Oregon being ranked 12 and, as you said, USC ranked 20th, it'll for sure show fans and the nation and, the AP voters if they have accurately ranked these teams, which I'm really interested to see how that plays out. I think for sure the USC-Arizona State game is going to be a better game than Oregon-Stanford. I think Oregon should win that pretty easily for that. It's hard to tell right now if any Pac-12 teams will be a big contender for the national championship.
Right. I'll interrupt you right now. Oregon is the highest ranked Pac-12 team currently at number 12. So if there's anyone that has a chance, I feel like it would be them. I'm not sold on USC. I'm not sold on Clay Helton. I think honestly they'll probably lose this game to Arizona State. I'm going out on a limb and saying that. I could be totally wrong.
We have it here on tape now. So.
But I think that Oregon is the most talented team. They have the best defense. They have a guy that's probably going to be, a top 10 pick in the future NFL draft in Kayvon Thibodeau, one of the best defensive linemen in the country for sure. I'm excited to see these Pac-12 games, though. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some pro sports, some injuries in the NFL, and, of course, we missed the World Series final game, and we'll get you a little bit caught up on that. Be sure to stick with us.
Oh, there you go. Superstar.
The end of the practice is when we do all of our, intensity drills.
Okay.
She was going at it.
Stop. If we get them to Detroit by, let's say Monday the 15th. Time's right there. There we go. Yeah. Just, you can't.
Don't want to talk about it.
When you see the water tower, you're gonna make a right.
If we win this, we have one way to get to the playoffs.
I know.
Welcome back to Behind the Line. Alex Dusky and I, Parker Terrell, are talking about all things sports. We're going to talk about pro sports in a second. Let's finish up our college football segment real quick with the Big Ten. There was a big game last week, Ohio State taking on Penn State. And what was, the final score doesn't really indicate how much of a blowout that was. I believe the final score was 38-25.
Correct, yes.
And Penn State scored with 30 seconds left. So that just goes to show you that Ohio State just keeps inching away from the pack as the best
Which
team.
was expected.
Yeah,
Nothing,
I agree.
Nothing new here, for
I mean,
sure.
Penn State was ranked pretty heavily going into the season. They, of course, lost to Indiana in week 1
Right.
in overtime by 1.
Yeah, there's
then-
36-35.
Yeah, and then, of course, losing to Ohio State. So Ohio State is definitely inching itself away and showing itself to be one of the top 3 teams in the country, along with Clemson and Alabama. And another big loss in the Big Ten is Michigan State over Michigan. Is Jim Harbaugh's time in Michigan over?
I don't know. I think there's a lot to be said about that game, especially since Michigan State lost to Rutgers in week 1 of that game. Rutgers.
Yeah. And Rutgers is not bad. They played Indiana tight last week. They ended up losing, of course, but Rutgers is not as by no means an awful team as they used to be.
Exactly.
But
Got to
that's
put some
still-
respect on Greg Schiano's name. And
That's still a
there's-
game that you would think Michigan State
should have won. Yes, I'm not going to take that away. So that's why that win, was Michigan State, that bad? Or was Rutgers that good? Or was it just a fluke on either game? Was it
And
a
it
fluke
was the first game back,
Right.
I'll admit. But quick stat, Jim Harbaugh is 1-6 against Ohio State and Michigan State combined. So a lot of Michigan fans are not upset with that record at all. Okay, now let's get into pro sports. A couple weeks ago, last week, we obviously weren't on.
Correct.
Odell Beckham Jr., one of the NFL's top receivers, one of its top stars, went down with an ACL injury, of course, for the Cleveland Browns.
Here's the footage of
Yeah,
that.
we have that Beal roll right here. It was
Basically
on
what
a
it
really
was.
tough play. Yeah, go
It
ahead.
was an underthrown pass from Mayfield to OBJ, and there it is. The interception was from the Bengals' Darius Phillips, and then he just crumples there. And
Well, yeah, I mean, he
tears
was
it.
trying to make a play. He was trying to get back and, tackle the guy that had intercepted the ball. And in that hustle play, he just ended up, having probably the worst injury that you can suffer, at least in terms of his season-ending injury. So, that's tough on the Browns. And
some people are arguing like it's bad for the Browns but good for Baker, because after that game he was more consistent with throwing to other receivers who are more reliable than OBJ. Now, not necessarily, you have to take it in a balance, because if they're constantly catching the ball but not making as dynamic of plays, whereas OBJ wasn't very consistent, but when he, got the ball, he would make those outstanding plays. And so I think it's just going to be an
you
interesting
saw
dynamic.
it, though, this past week. They lost to the Raiders.
Right.
A lot of people are now saying that they wish that OBJ was back. So who knows? That Browns team is kind of an enigma. They are really talented, but they're definitely going to be without perhaps their star receiver. In terms of talent, I would argue that Jarvis Landry is their best receiver. We'll see how that plays out up there in the AFC North. Moving on to baseball.
Yeah.
In this COVID-shortened season, only 60 games, then leading into the playoffs, the Los Angeles Dodgers win the World Series in 6 games.
There's some questionable things about that. I'm not going to say that everyone was expecting the Rays to win. When Ian was on here 2 weeks ago, I think he said we predicted that the Rays would win Game 6 and it would go to Game 7. I think that's what a lot of people were predicting. But the Rays manager, Kevin Cash, pulled out starting pitcher Blake Snell. He had thrown 73 pitches and had only given up 2 hits. And yet, after they pulled him and put in the other pitcher, the Dodgers scored and took the lead of that game in less than 1 out. So then the Dodgers did end up winning that game, and here's the little clip from that.
Yeah, here's the
At the
final.
end of that.
They're them celebrating the first Dodgers title since 1988. A lot of people, that might come as a surprise to them, because they think of the Dodgers. They are one of the highest payrolls in the league, and they have been for some time, but it's been a while since they won a World Series. But congratulations to them. Congratulations to the city of LA winning back-to-back championships. Of course, the Lakers winning in the NBA, and now the Dodgers winning in the major leagues. When we come back, Sadeep Tuma from the Ocali is going to come talk to us about this upcoming OSU versus Kansas State game in Manhattan. Be sure to stick around.
Hi everybody, my name is Emily Shooping. I'm your marketing coordinator for the Made in Oklahoma Coalition. I'm coming to you with an amazing opportunity. We are teaming up with the Ocali Media Group at Oklahoma State University. We want to tell your story on the following platforms: streaming, newspaper, and digital. This opportunity will not only allow your story to be told locally, but nationally as well. I am so excited for each of you to join in on this tremendous opportunity. This will not only be good for your business, but it will be good for our great state of Oklahoma. You can be expecting an email from me soon with more details about this opportunity. Local has a name, local has a face, local has a flavor. The Made in Oklahoma Coalition.
Hello and welcome back to the final segment of Behind the Line. Alex and I are here with Sadeep Tuma of the Ocali, the sports editor of the Ocali, talking about this week's game against Kansas State. But first, Alex, you're going to talk about what the loss last week means for the season.
Yeah, Parker and I were talking about it earlier, just saying how we did drop 8 spots in the AP poll, and now with that loss going into the K-State game, we still have Bedlam, we still have Texas Tech. What does that mean for the Cowboys, and how does the Big 12 championship work, and, are the playoffs hopes gone?
Well, I think it's almost premature to say they're completely gone because, the loss hurts a little bit. But I think an OSU team that wins out from here on, only losses to Texas, is a pretty big victory. I think, especially with the Texas team that's now ranked, that's probably looking better for the entire season. I think, like I said, right, it gets a little bit harder, but I don't think it's so hard where it's like, oh, this is really a stretch. I mean, look at the top, right? You have Clemson, Notre Dame there. Clemson, Notre Dame, one of them's going to lose, right?
Right.
They're playing next week. And then ACC Championship. Georgia's already lost a game. I mean, this OSU team on paper, college football playoff takes eye test into account, right? This defense has been really impressive. Spencer's getting more and more healthy, and he's looking better. Obviously, the turnovers a little hurt. But overall, he played a pretty good game, I'd say. And I think, like I said, right, it hurts a little bit, but I don't think it's so bad. I think win out, and it comes pretty close, if not the 4th spot in the college football playoffs.
Also, Texas has yet to play both Kansas State and Iowa State.
Right, exactly. And it's like, if you just look at OSU, right, they have one conference loss. Most of the other teams have 2, right? The heavy hitters, right? OU, Texas. I mean, OU has 2 right now, and Texas, I believe, has 1. Right,
TCU and OU.
That's right. Yes. So, I mean, OSU has a step above right now.
And of course, if they get a win this week, then they'll be in sole possession of first place.
Exactly. Yeah, they control their own destiny, right? Like 100%. And I mean, the way they're playing, I just think I keep saying this, they should have won by double digits, right? OSU should have won by double digits.
They'll tell you that.
Right, exactly. And you saw how upset they were, how upset Spencer Sanders was after the game. Accountability, leadership. They played a very good game. It was just a couple turnovers that really gave Texas good field position. I mean, this OSU defense is legit. They kept the best offense in the Big 12 down to nothing, really. I mean,
And Ellinger is known for his running. He leads the Texas team in rushing. I believe he only had like 9 yards total.
Yeah, and a lot of that is play design in the sense of Texas. Usually they have a lot of design runs, a lot of read options with Ellinger. But I think they didn't do that. I mean, they definitely didn't do that. You only saw that maybe twice. And I think the biggest reason why is the fact that this OSU defense has such good sideline-to-sideline speed. They're able to stop any sort of east-west motion. They're able to stop guys in their tracks, right, in the run game. And you can't just have Ellinger try to bully guys because these are great tacklers for OSU. And I think that was just a big part of, because you were going up against OSU's defense, Texas had to just rearrange their entire game plan.
Looking forward to this weekend against K-State, what they're 4-2. Their 2 losses are from the first week against Arkansas State, where they lost 35-31, and then last week against West Virginia, as Parker and I were saying earlier. Freshman quarterback Will Howard for the Wildcats, he averages 4 touchdowns against conference opponents, but last week he had 3 interceptions. Yeah. So how should Cowboy defense go about taking down the Wildcats offense?
Well, the way the Wildcats play, it's a downhill power football attack. They're all about the run game and opening up things through the play action. When Skylar Thompson went down, it kind of looked like their season was over, right? But he's been very good. Will Howard has. He has a great arm. Mechanics are sound. He's a very good quarterback, I think. It was just West Virginia has one of the best defenses in the country, quietly. But I think it's one of those things where you stop that attack. You stop Deuce Vaughn, great running back out of the backfield. Underrated guy, freshman. He's 5'5", but reminds you a lot of Darren Sproles. Great, another Wildcat.
Yeah.
I think it starts there, and you just continue to sustain drives on offense like you did against Texas. They had 6 drives of at least 60 yards. They were scoring touchdowns, right? They weren't turning the ball over. I think you continue to do that, and you win the game.
I think so. The final score to that Kansas State West Virginia game was 37-10,
Right.
and I think that Oklahoma State's offense is quite a bit more talented than West Virginia's. They
No
have
doubt.
a lot more depth, a lot more options, and then of course you have to factor in, I'm not going to say the revenge factor, but just
Right.
them being upset about what happened this last week. And you can say the same about Kansas State. And if there's any team that can bounce back, it's Chris Kleiman's squad. You saw them bounce back from a loss to Arkansas State to upset Oklahoma on the road. So, but I think that this will be a big game for a guy like Chuba Hubbard, who had his lowest rushing total since 2019 against Texas, a team that's not known for their run defense. I think that you'll see, of course, Talon Wallace played great against Texas, and I don't think that the cornerbacks for Kansas State are more talented than Texas. So look for Talon Wallace to have a big game, and for Sanders to just, be more efficient.
Sure.
I think that against Texas, you saw, I guess timid might be the right word, especially early in that game. If you remember, this is only his second game. That was only his
Right.
second game
Yeah.
this season. So I think he's learned a lot from that. I think him, Coach Rattay, and Coach Gundy have talked about their mistakes, and the entire team has shown, they've talked about it yesterday in media, or 2 days ago in media availability, that they're rallying around Spencer. There's zero quarterback controversy. They love this guy, and he's their quarterback. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100% because you saw it right after the game, the amount of emotion, leadership he possessed, and accountability. But honestly, if not for Spencer Sanders, OSU's offense wouldn't have kept driving down drive after drive, right? I mean, we talk about Texas having to drive 70, 80 yards each possession.
Right.
OSU was, right? They were going each and every time, and that's what almost kept Texas down.
And
right?
I'll count that roughing the punter penalty.
As a fifth
That
turnover.
that
Yeah.
was the back-breaking play.
Sure.
Without that, I say we win that game despite all the turnovers that we had.
Yeah, that's exactly the thought I had, right? You had 4 turnovers, but you were just thinking, man, if OSU holds on, they hold on, right? And yeah, you're right. That was really, like I said, a 5th turnover.
Yeah.
And I think it came down to this. I mean, the turnovers, yeah, sure, the efficiency, but Spencer played a great game. 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. And it was really on him where this vertical attack was the thing that was keeping this offense going, right? It's not that Chuba played bad. It was that this D-line for Texas was just hounding, right?
Right.
All right, quickly, prediction, Sadeep. Who do you think is going to win this game?
I'd have to say, I think OSU will bounce back. I think it'll be 35-20
Gotcha.
OSU.
Perfect. Alex?
I say 31-17 OSU.
I'm going to go 35-20. Oklahoma State comes out on top and gets into that sole possession of first place. All right, for Sadeep and Alex and the entire crew here in Studio 318, we thank you so much for watching Behind the Line. Be sure to tune in next week.